ever feel like just getting from point A to B is like an adventure these days?
Right.
Today we're doing a deep dive into the Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking like buses and bridges. This is about how the DOT's policies actually like impact our daily lives, you know?
Absolutely.
So we're looking at this chapter, right, from Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise.
Okay.
And it argues that the DOT, it's kind of strayed from its original mission.
Interesting.
Now, look, we're not here to pick sides or anything.
Right.
But just getting a handle on these arguments, it could totally change how you view everything, like from car prices to even just that new sidewalk, down the street.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to think about the DOT as this like distant entity.
Totally.
But their decisions, they have very real consequences, often in ways, honestly, we don't even realize.
Exactly. And that's what's so important about this deep dive. So the book, it argues that instead of focusing on like, safety and regulation, the DOT has become, well, they call it the massive great giving machine.
Okay. Interesting.
What do you make of that argument?
Well, I think it raises an important question, right? About local versus federal control.
Right.
And the book, it actually gives a really good example, like building a new sidewalk. Should that be made in Washington, D.C.?
Right.
Or should it be made by the people who actually live on that street, the people who, walk that sidewalk every day?
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, who actually knows best?
Yeah.
How those funds should be used.
Precisely. And you see this tension between, like, federal oversight and local decision-making. It's like a constant thread, I think, in transportation policy.
Absolutely. And speaking of tension, let's talk cars. I mean, everyone's feeling the pinch of these high prices, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the book argues that those fuel efficiency standards, APFA, that we hear so much about, they might actually be part of the problem, which is so counterintuitive. Like, I thought fuel efficiency was a good thing.
Right. And it is, in theory. But this book highlights how stricter CAFE standards, they push automakers to use more, pricier technology.
Okay.
And of course, that gets passed on to us, the consumers.
Right. Higher sticker prices.
Exactly. And those higher prices mean some people, they might be forced to keep driving their older cars, potentially less safe cars.
So it's like this trade-off then between fuel efficiency and affordability.
Yeah.
And potentially even safety, which is crazy.
Exactly. And it really leads to, I think, a debate about the role of government.
Right.
Should they be, at the forefront, pushing for all these rapid technological advancements, even with, the potential downsides?
Right.
Or should the focus be more on making sure people can just afford, a safe, reliable vehicle, regardless of its fuel efficiency?
It's a tough question. And it gets even more complex, I think, when you factor in, this big push for electric vehicles. The book seems to suggest that this push for EVs, especially through CAFE standards, has some unintended consequences. It even uses the term like national security risk at one point.
Right. And they're arguing that by, pushing for this rapid EV adoption, we become way more reliant on, foreign countries for those raw materials, all the stuff you need for EV batteries.
Right.
And that reliance, they say, could pose a risk to national security.
So instead of like, us decreasing our dependence on foreign oil,
right,
we might just be like increasing our dependence on foreign, materials, which is
exactly,
that's a pretty big trade-off.
It is a big trade-off to consider. And it kind of raises the question then, is this push for EVs, is it really driven by, this desire for energy independence, or are there other factors at play, like, environmental concerns, economic competitiveness, maybe?
Right, yeah.
What's really driving this?
So many layers to unpack here. It's like pulling on one thread leads to, like, this whole web of interconnected issues.
It really does.
And speaking of navigating, complex systems, the book doesn't just focus on cars, right?
Right.
It digs into all these other areas the DOT oversees.
Yeah, absolutely.
What really stood out to you in those sections?
One theme that I noticed popping up again and again was this challenge of balancing progress with tradition.
Okay.
So, for example, in the section on aviation, they were discussing open skies agreements, which,
And those were supposed to be like this win for consumers, right?
Yeah.
More competition, lower fares.
Right, exactly. They were going to liberalize air travel, remove all those restrictions on routes and pricing.
Yeah. So what's the downside?
Well, the book argues that, while open skies agreements, they can benefit consumers for sure,
Yes.
they don't always create a level playing field for U.S. airlines.
Okay.
So it might actually put them at a disadvantage.
Interesting. And it's not just about, like, you know, competition between airlines.
Right.
The book also mentions the pilot shortage, right?
Yes.
And how that could
Yeah.
impact, safety.
Exactly. Yeah. Because with fewer pilots available,
Mhm.
airlines might be forced to use, smaller planes on certain routes.
Right.
And that obviously raises concerns about, well, are they as safe? Are they as reliable?
Right. Right. And it just highlights how these, like, seemingly unrelated issues,
Mm.
like labor shortages and international agreements,
Right.
we can have this, like, ripple effect on our everyday travel.
Absolutely. It's all connected. And you see that interconnectedness in the section on railroads as well.
Okay.
The book argues that, we have all this amazing technology now that could totally revolutionize rail safety and efficiency.
Yeah.
But there's this big focus on preserving existing jobs, and
Right.
that might actually be what's hindering progress.
So it's a similar theme then of, like, balancing the needs of the present with, the potential of the future.
Exactly. Holding on to what we know versus embracing something new, and that resistance to change, according to the book, it extends to how the DOT approaches public transportation, too.
Yeah, and it feels like public transit, even that term,
Oh, I know, right?
it's evolving, like what it even means.
Exactly.
That's just buses and trains anymore.
Not at all.
Right.
The book argues that the DOT needs to, broaden their view.
Yeah.
Think more broadly about public transportation.
Yeah.
One that includes, ride-sharing services, e-bikes, scooters,
Okay.
all of that.
It's like we're moving from a world of, like, fixed routes and schedules
Right.
to this, like, more dynamic on-demand system, and
Yeah.
DOT needs to, like, catch up.
Yes, catch up and adapt. And it makes you wonder, about the DOT's role in the future of transportation in general.
Right.
Can they really adapt to all these changes that are happening so fast, embrace these new innovations, or are they going to stay stuck in these, outdated models?
That's the billion-dollar question.
It really is.
And the book does offer, some thoughts on what a more adaptable, future-proof DOT might look like.
Okay.
It all boils down to priorities, right? Like, what should be at the top of their list?
Absolutely.
What do they need to focus on?
Well, the book argues that the DOT should prioritize making transportation more affordable and abundant for all Americans.
It sounds like a great goal. I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Right.
But how do we get there? I mean, it seems like achieving those objectives, like, that would require some major, like, shifts in thinking and some tough decisions.
Oh, absolutely. For example, the book suggests we need to, rethink how we approach funding these infrastructure projects, instead of relying so heavily on, federal grants, which can often come with, strings attached.
Right.
And they might not always align with what local communities actually need, right?
Right.
The book proposes checking out some, alternative funding models.
Okay, like what?
They mention things like public-private partnerships, for instance.
Right, right. So that's where, like, private companies would then invest in these infrastructure projects.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I guess maybe in exchange for, like, tolls, or they get a share of future revenue or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly.
Interesting.
So it's all about, coming up with more innovative ways
Right.
to fund the projects that we really need without, putting such a burden on taxpayers.
Right, right. It's just fascinating. Like, imagine these different approaches playing out in the real world.
Yeah, right.
Like, what would it mean for, traffic congestion?
Yeah.
Or for access to transportation, especially in more, like, rural areas?
Very huge questions.
These are the kind of things that, policymakers are, like, really grappling with.
Yeah. And ultimately, there's no one-size-fits-all solution here, right?
Of course not.
The best way to approach it is going to be different everywhere you go, right? Depending on the circumstances.
Exactly. And I guess that brings us back to that whole idea of, like, a reset.
Yeah.
Like, if we were going to design, the DOT from scratch today,
right
now, knowing everything that we know about, like, all the challenges and opportunities that are ahead, what would we prioritize? What would be, like, at the top of the list? What would our, like, guiding principles even be?
Right. Are we going to prioritize efficiency above all else?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be more about, equity, accessibility, even if it means, maybe, potentially, things might cost a little more, or an
Yeah.
implementation might take a little longer.
Right, and it's important to remember, too, right? These aren't just like, these abstract policy debates.
Very
They
right.
have a real impact on our lives, whether we're commuting to work or, like, traveling across the country,
Right.
or even just trying to get around our own neighborhoods.
It's true, and I think that's what makes, this deep dive in this conversation so relevant, honestly. It's about understanding those forces that shape our transportation systems and realizing that, we all have a stake in those choices that are being made.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about connecting those dots, right, between those policy decisions
Right.
and our daily lives,
Yeah.
our commutes, our, family vacations,
Yeah.
even just like, the cost of groceries. It's all connected.
Because transportation, it isn't just about, getting from point A to point B.
It's not.
It's
Yeah.
about, connecting with people,
Yeah.
connecting with opportunities, with the world around us.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm. So there you have it.
There it is.
Our deep dive into the wild world of the Department of Transportation,
Uh-huh.
guided by, of course, the insights from Mandate for Leadership.
A great read.
Yeah, we hope this has given you, a fresh perspective maybe
Yeah.
on the DOT's role, all the challenges they're facing.
So many challenges.
Right. And, the potential paths forward because, I mean, it's
Good luck.
a lot. There are a lot of different ways this could go.
Oh, yeah.
And if this is, sparked your curiosity, if you're like, intrigued,
Yeah.
we always encourage you to check out, the full source material yourself.
Yeah. Mandate for Leadership. Definitely check it out.
It's a thought-provoking read for sure.
It makes you think.
It really does. And it might just, change how you think about the future of transportation.
Because that future is being shaped right now as we speak.
It really is.
And it's a conversation we all need to be a part of.
Couldn't agree more. Well said. Well, until next time.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions.
Yes.
And keep those wheels turning.
Uh-huh. I like that. Bye.